Hello, friends, and welcome to the Weekly Witness Legislative Wrap-Up Series. Weekly Witness is Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with the Texas legislature. Throughout the series, we're focusing on what happened during the 88 Texas legislature and what comes next. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and I hope you're enjoying the great guests who have helped us break down all you need to know about the session, the interim, and the upcoming election season. This week, many public school kids throughout Texas are going back to school. Mine went back this week and are actually excited to see their friends and teachers, even though we're all a little less excited for the morning alarm to go off much earlier. I'm sure public school teachers, staff, and administrators are also excited for the possibilities the new school year brings, but maybe less excited about the legislature's failure to use the record budget surplus to invest in public schools and public school teachers. So this seems like a perfect week to have a chat about public education with a public school parent, former Austin ISD School Board President, and current Texas State Representative Gina Hinojosa, who currently represents Austin's House District 49. We'll talk with Representative Hinojosa about public education and how Texans of faith can engage with our representatives on this important topic, especially as we move toward an expected special session and an election season at the local and state level that will focus on public schools. And as always, Texas Impact has tools for you to engage. So make sure to go to texasimpact.org and check the Action Center for ways you can get involved. But I think that's about enough intro for today. We are glad you're with us and hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Representative Gina Hinojosa. Joining us for today's conversation is State Representative Gina Hinojosa, who represents House District 49 here in lovely Austin, Texas. She's been a member of the school board. She's done some great work on public education. Representative Hinojosa, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We are talking about public schools today, which is perfectly timed because I know my kids started back to school this week and we're so excited. I know yours started back as well. Are you excited for the beginning of the school year?
There's a lot to look forward to, and absolutely, we've got one starting middle school. I've got a senior in high school, so lots to look forward to.
Lots to look forward to. I don't know that my kids would say the same thing, but I'm excited they're back and looking forward to the year. As I said, you've done a lot of great work on public education, both in the Texas legislature and as a school board member here in Austin. And as we've gone throughout this legislative wrap-up series, I'd like to start with positives because I'm an optimist at heart. Anything that you took pride in or any positives that came out of the legislative session this time in regards to public education?
Absolutely. I am very proud that we killed the governor's number one legislative priority this legislative session, and that was vouchers. And that was accomplished through a bipartisan pushback against the governor's effort to pass education savings accounts, which is just another name for vouchers. And I worked with hardcore MAGA Republicans in and outside the legislature and Democrats, all supporters of our public schools. That support is a defining issue for Texans. It is enshrined in our Texas Constitution, and people were loud and strong in support of our public schools this session.
I want to come back to that in a few minutes because I know there will be another chance to take on that issue this fall, or I expect there will be another chance to take on that issue this fall. But when we look back at the Texas legislature that has concluded, are there any bills that have finally passed that you feel like will do harm to Texas public school students or teachers?
Well, I'll say that the thing that did the most harm was our failure to fully fund our public schools at a time when we have a historic budget surplus. We have about $30 billion in the Treasury right now that's just sitting there. And yet we have not increased per student funding since 2019. We know just to keep up with inflation for our students, to buy what we bought in 2019, we'd have to raise per student funding by $1,000 per student. And we raised it zero.
Wow.
And that's going to mean schools will be shut down, teachers will be laid off, classroom sizes will be bigger. Our schools won't have the money they need for what is a large priority for Texans, and that's school safety. So there are all sorts of ramifications for not fully funding our schools, and we have no excuse since the money is sitting there, and it's our taxpayer money that we've paid in for our schools, and it's just sitting there in the Treasury.
Is there a chance to get those dollars in a special session? What do you hope positive can come out of the potential special session?
It is my belief that the governor right now has the power and the authority to fully fund our schools on his own. The special session is a voucher session. It's
Right.
a farce to think that we need to come back to fully fund our schools. If you'll think back to when the governor spent $2 billion on a border wall that wasn't appropriated for a
Right.
few years ago, right? Where there is a will, there's a way. The governor has demonstrated in the past that he will find the money to fund his priorities. For Texans, we have spoken loud and clear that our public schools are our priority. The legislature has tried for the better part of this year to fund our schools. It is the governor's people who have blocked that every step of the way. The ball is in his court to fully fund our schools.
So if people of faith, if our listeners care about funding for public schools, what's the action step they should be taking short term?
The action step is to talk to people within your networks and clearly state that the governor should fully fund our schools. Weigh in the way you know to weigh in with the governor's office. But I always like to say real change doesn't happen on the floor of the House. It doesn't happen in Austin. Real change happens in our communities. And so the more we can do to educate people within our networks about what's going on, the more power we have to make things happen in Austin.
I feel like those local coalitions are important on every issue, but maybe no issue more than public education and supporting for our public schools. So what does that look like if we're organizing well at the local level, and why is that particularly important when it comes to public education?
Well, I think that people need to understand the way our schools are funded. Absolutely, our local school boards have the authority to pass budgets, but they can't pay for things with money they don't have, right? And the state makes per funding decisions. In Austin, I'll give an example. We will be spending this year alone $800 million in money we send back to the state under recapture, also known as Robin Hood. That money is supposed to go to pay for resource poor schools, so school districts where property values aren't as high as in Austin. However, at this point, that recapture Robin Hood system is so broken that money goes to be spent on all sorts of other priorities of our leadership and also to fully fund the growth in charter schools. So that system is broken, but what I bottom line want people to understand is our school districts don't have the money they need to give teachers a pay raise. Many school districts have funded teacher pay raises out of their fund balance. So they are deficit spending. They are spending money that they don't have, money they set aside for an emergency that should not be used for a reoccurring expenditure. But because the state did not step up and do our part to fully fund our schools, they're having to do that. So the state needs to provide the funding for our schools that's needed. And last legislative session, that did not happen. So saying within your school communities what you know, and that is the state has not increased per student funding, and that decision is in the governor's hands right now.
Let's come back to vouchers and the expected special session, which we're expecting sometime this fall. What do you think will be on the agenda? What's the arguments against a voucher program, and what do you hope people will do in preparation for that?
Well, right. It's a voucher session. The House has rejected vouchers every which way that it knows how to do this legislative session and in prior legislative sessions.
Y'all seem to be pretty clear on this so far, right?
We have been very clear. So I will say right now that if a voucher passes the Texas legislature, it is because of a failure of strategy on the part of the House. It is not the House's will. It is not the desire of the House to pass a voucher. We have stated that every which way we know how. So if a voucher passes, it's because the House got outplayed by both the governor and the Senate. This is something that I tried to make clear during the legislative session the special legislative session we just passed where we set aside money for tax breaks, for property tax breaks, which is something people of all walks support. But we should have taken that opportunity to put more money into our schools, because now where we are is if we come back for money in our schools, the Senate is going to once again demand that we trade that for a voucher. And that is just not a good trade for our Texas public schools.
You mentioned at the beginning that opposition to vouchers is bipartisan, that you've worked with people across the political spectrum on that. Can you talk some to our listeners about why it's especially important on this issue to have a conversation with your legislator about this issue in particular?
Right. It is bipartisan. There are 20 plus mostly rural Republicans who have made a commitment to vote against vouchers. And the reason being is that their school district is the biggest employer in their community. It is the hub of the community. And their communities don't want vouchers. There aren't private schools in their communities at which to spend these vouchers.
Right.
They are 100% behind their public schools. And so this is one of those few issues, maybe veterans issues and this issue, where we can bypass that national kind of Fox News rhetoric and talk about what is a Texas value. Again, this is a value that is enshrined in our Texas Constitution. It says in our Texas Constitution that we have a duty to provide for a public education for all students, right? So this is still a Texas value. It is the one place where I found hope this legislative session, and it is in how hardcore I found many rural Republicans were in support of our public schools, who have said this is the hill they will die on. In under no circumstances will they come around to support vouchers, even if it meant more money for their schools, because they know what I know to be true. And there is no, little bit of a small voucher that we can pass.
Right.
Because that opens the door to what we know is the true aim, and that is a universal voucher like we've seen all across this nation happen, that has really been resulted in learning loss for most public school students and for those who take advantage of vouchers. So that is a road we cannot go down. It would be a historic decision to vote to fund any kind of voucher. Even, we have people talk about, let's just do a voucher for kids in special education. Well, the reason that is wrongheaded, is misguided, is because that's where a voucher would do the most harm. Our kids in special education, they have federal protections, federal rights to a full education, full and appropriate education. And they don't have those rights in a private school, even with the public school voucher. So they would lose the most. But we know that once a voucher is out there, private entities will start marketing to them and sell them things that probably don't really exist in their private schools. The only place they are entitled to that free and appropriate education is in a public school.
Yeah. So I live in one of those rural communities that you talk about, and our community is fiercely protective of the public school. We love our high school football, and we show up for the band concerts, and love our public school teachers. There are a lot of people in communities like mine who haven't spent a lot of time meeting with their legislators or advocating on issues like this. As an elected representative, what's the best way that people can communicate to you and your colleagues?
The best way is to request an appointment with your legislator at their district office. And so legislators have an office in Austin at the Capitol, but oftentimes when we're there, we're in session on the floor and it's hard to get to us. Right now, legislators are back in their home districts. And if you can snag a meeting with your legislator, that's the best way. If not with your legislator, with a legislator staffer. But what I would say is it's important not to take any vote for granted, not a Democrat, not a Republican. And for two reasons. One, we know there is a big push by voucher advocates to pull off and pick off Democratic opposition to vouchers and to get them to support vouchers in the end. And so there's a lot of money being spent, for instance, and the money is being spent both for Democrats and Republicans. 2, even those of us who oppose vouchers tend to fight a little bit harder when we know that our people are watching and care. Right. So I always think of Mike Mulligan and the steam engine, this book that I used to read to my son about how the steam engine, they dig a little faster and work a little harder when they're being watched. Right. Well, we're the same. And so when we know our constituents are paying attention, we will fight that much harder.
All right. Well, really appreciate the time today. Any closing thoughts or shameless plugs you want to leave us with?
Well, just that this is a place where we can work on a real issue. Public education is a real issue that is so far has not been corrupted by national political rhetoric that divides us. And so I really do hope that we will all be in and go all in on supporting our public schools.
Representative, really appreciate you taking the time today. I know you didn't get as much time off this summer as maybe you would have liked, and busy season with back to school. So we'll certainly be watching you as the session comes. And if there's anything we can do to support your work, please let us know.
Appreciate it.
You.
Thanks so much.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation this week. I want to thank Representative Hinojosa for the time and for her work, and thank you for tuning in and for the work you're about to do. As I said in the open, this episode is part of Texas Impact's Legislative Wrap-Up series. Be sure that you're subscribed and go ahead and share the content with a friend or your place of worship to help them stay informed about what just happened in the 88th and what happens next. Public schools are the heart of our communities, and I hope you'll take advantage of Texas Impact's opportunities to engage on this issue over the next few months and the next 2 years to make a clear statement that Texans of faith support public schools. We are in an important part of the interim cycle, before the expected special session, but with enough time to organize our congregations and communities to mobilize voter turnout and civic engagement efforts this fall and in 2024. So check out texasimpact.org for resources and sign up for a team in the Action Center. While you're on the website, I hope you'll consider joining Texas Impact to support this podcast and the work of Texas Impact year-round. Learn more or sign up for one of our teams at texasimpact.org. So with that, I think it's time to close out this episode, so remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.